Let's move to Maximo Torero. Maximo.
Thank you so much. Let me raise some points which I think are important. First, we are in a world today that we have a significant crisis, which has increased and will increase substantially in number of undernourishment. So the world was in 690 million people undernourished. This will grow up to 130 million more people undernourished, 115 million people moving into extreme poverty. So what we do is essential, and the way we transform the system is essential, because we are also facing a system that has a lot of constraints in terms of environment and climate. So an agri-food system transformation is essential in this place. And in that context, I think that the Green Deal with its farm to fork strategy of the biodiversity strategy and other initiatives are crucial elements in this regard, and the CAP will certainly play a key role being an executive tool for this transition to green technologies by encouraging and supporting farmers making efforts for this transition. So it's a huge moment, a huge opportunity to start this agri-food system transformation that takes into account not only production of quality food to be able to satisfy the access to healthy diets, especially with emphasis on reducing food loss and waste, which I think is central, but it's also important in terms of the environment and how we can make this sustainable. One of the efforts we are doing is trying to understand what are the trade-offs of the different policies we put in place to be able to achieve SDG 2 and SDG 1. And every policy we implement will have a set of trade-offs, and those are what we need to quantify and to try to minimize. So I'm more than hopeful that we can work together to try to measure those trade-offs and trying to figure out how those can be minimized so that the environment can be more sustainable, and also we can achieve the goal of providing healthy diets to everybody, which is what we need. In that sense, technology, data, high-frequency data, innovation, but also complements, which include governance, human capital, and institutions, are central to be able to achieve this goal. Technology, innovation, agroecology, and other technologies can help to achieve the goal, but if we don't have the institutionality and the governance behind, it will be very difficult to do it. So for me, we welcome the efforts taken by the European Union to make food systems more sustainable, responsible, and resilient. And it's important to understand that right now, to make it resilient, you need to cover two components. No? To understand the risk, which means you have to have predictive power on the early warning systems. You need to identify when potential crises like the one we are facing of zoonotic diseases will hit, but also we need to learn how to cope with the risk. So once the risk happens, how we can handle and cope with that risk so that we can minimize the effects. Those two elements are important. The first one is really complex. To be able to have predictive power is really complex because it has a significant component not only of risk, but also uncertainty. And uncertainty is when we don't know the probability of that event to occur and we don't know the outcome, like what is happening in COVID-19. So I think working together to developing the tools that could help the implementation of the deal is something really important, and this is where FAO is willing to support. Thank you.
Maximo, you mentioned 130 million increase in undernourished. I think it was 650 currently undernourished globally as well. If we just look at the propensity in Africa over the medium term, I think from memory, there's a migratory pressure on about 400 million people just on the African continent as well. Is Europe just looking after itself in this, or does the Green Deal really have capacity for global leadership here to address these issues?
So what is clear is that we are completely interlinked, and there is nothing can be done in one region without affecting other regions and vice versa. So I think the Green Deal can bring ways of transforming the food system that can be learned and can be scaled up. But we need to be open and flexible, and we need to see where the major challenges are. Regions are different, they have their own differences and their own needs. Some regions need right now more protein consumption, and of course they need more meat. Some other regions are over-consuming meat. So the policies and the strategies and the pathways will be different. When I was referring to the numbers, is just to understand, although we have, before COVID-19, 690 million people undernourished and 130 more, there are 3 billion people that don't have access to healthy diets, the minimum cost healthy diets. And that's what needs to change. No? So if we can see that in the case of Europe, these efforts of creating a food system that is sustainable could create the impacts that are needed, we must also understand that there are private and public goods, and whatever is related to a public good, like environment and so on, that will affect the world, and that will be benefits for all the world. But if we don't coordinate across, I think the differences will be big, and that's where we need to try to minimize those differences and to create mechanisms of competition and which is fair under the same grounds, and which allows also to create a better flow of trade, both globally but also regionally, interregionally. So a lot of challenges, a lot of questions, but that's something that we need to focus carefully on. No, I just want to follow up on that, because I think the word solidarity and multilateralism is essential right now. Okay. And that requires that we need to have some coherence in policies and some understanding of how things are happening across the world, not only within a region, of course. And whatever a region can do to improve that, I think is great, and that's something that needs to be scaled up and needs to be extrapolated. And that's where I think it's essential to be able to better understand and have the best possible information on the potential effects. For me, something that normally we confuse is what is a private good and what is a public good. Because a private good, I can make my own decisions and I can resolve my problem. But when we are referring to a public good, then the issue is a little bit more complex, because in the case of environment, we're talking of a public good. We're not talking of a private good. And that's where we need to find ways in which we can optimize at the global level the returns to that, so that we can use our resources in the best possible way.
Well, I wanted to ask you about this in terms of risk management as well. You spoke about what we know, what we don't know, which is always part of the problem. But if we're going to align our objectives, and those are going to be objectives based on data, and that data has got to be accurate, those targets have got to be realistic, and the timelines have got to be actionable as well. What's on the table at the moment that you see as good risk management tools that can inform the data, the policy process at the moment, Maximo?
Yeah, what I was referring is two different concepts. No, one thing is risk. In risk, you know the probability of happening and you know the outcome, but you have uncertainty. In uncertainty, you don't know the cost of the outcome, the result, like COVID-19, and you don't know the probability of distribution. So you don't know that it could have happened. If we knew that COVID-19 was coming, we would have been ready for it. So those are two elements. When we have risk, we can do, and that's where we have to put policies in place. And that's what I was saying. We need to improve early warning systems. We need to have more predictive power, but we also need to understand better the trade-offs so that we can manage them better. For every policy we do, there are trade-offs, and that's where we need to be able to manage better. So if we are going to achieve access to healthy diets for all in a sustainable food systems, then that could have trade-offs, and we need to measure those so that we can minimize those. If those trade-offs could affect other countries, then we also need to understand how we can cooperate with other countries to minimize those. So for me, a strategy that tries to diversify and tries to open the availability of resources, and trade plays a central role here, and food safety is essential too. So it's not only having access to healthy diets, it's also having access to food safe food around the world. And that requires also to help to reduce the non-tariff barriers, which will support the increase of flow of goods in the world, because trade at the end of the line is supposed to allocate resources in the best possible way. Of course, there are winners and losers, but that's what we need to do because our resources are very scarce.
Well, part of that's to do with the policy process in terms of preemptive policy planning as well. And you give the example of COVID. COVID was a disaster where governments had foresight of a pandemic, not exactly the COVID pandemic. I worked as a healthcare journalist for some years, and we used to write about this every single year. World Health Organization saying, pandemic's coming, be prepared. And many governments, including here in Belgium, they got rid of their PPE equipment. They didn't build up resilience as well. Now we have this foresight. You spoke about food and malnourishment across the globe. And then we have antimicrobial resistance as well, predicted as a next pandemic, and others too. We have all this intelligence and we're not acting upon it. What does it take in the policy process to see what's coming down the line and to action it before the crisis comes? From the FAO, how do you lobby governments to get this done now before the train hits the buffers?
We are doing as much as effort possible to be able to accelerate the process, and that's why we are calling. And yesterday we had a big starting meeting on the agri-food system transformation, where we are trying to prioritize interventions that will allow us to optimize and to create more information to assure that. So FAO is working on 4 pillars, for what we call 4 accelerators. It's innovation, technology, and data, big data. But the 4th is what we call the complements, which are governance, human capital, and institutions. It's very similar, I think, to what you have already in the farm to fork. And why? Because the complements will help to make those accelerators inclusive. The accelerators can grow very fast, but the complements is something that will help to do that. So building capacities, building human capital is essential in this process, but takes time. And disaccelerate a little bit the three other accelerators. Now, when we talk about on technology and innovation, that's where we need to look at what is best and what is evidence, scientific evidence to be able to change things. No?
Let me ask Maximo. Maximo, if I give you the whole of the EU R&I budget and said spend this to fix the problem, which pathways would you choose? Where would you prioritize? Would you put it into climate side to fix the problems that we have in terms of erosion? Or would you put it into growing crops that can resist the increasingly hot temperatures and produce grains that produce more protein? Which way would you go?
So, should I give you my account number? No,
yes, if you just put it in the chat, would you? And we'll get back to you on that.
No, yeah, to be concrete, I think that there are two types of innovation. What is technological innovation, and that's where research and innovation and development has to happen, and what is process innovation. I think we need to do both. It's not only new technologies and more resistant technologies, and that's all great, because what you need to do today is to produce more with less, and to be sustainable, and to produce good quality of nutritious food. So that's the situation today. And whatever innovations we can bring to be able to achieve that goal of giving access to healthy diets, that's what we are aiming to. And those innovations can go from weather resistance to pest resistant innovations, to keeping our soils more efficient and to be able to maintain the nature and avoid more soil erosion and avoid, for example, inefficient use of water. So I need to increase efficiency and I need to increase output, and that's complex. And that's where we need to start to think on marginal costs and marginal returns. Normally, we don't think of marginal returns. So every dollar I invest in something is because I want to achieve something. And that something should be a metric of reduction of undernourishment or reduction of extreme poverty, but something that pays back. Now, to achieve that, you will have a lot of trade-offs. And those trade-offs could go in multiple dimensions. So I prefer not to have 20 objective functions. I prefer to have 3 objective functions, SDG 1, 2, and 10. Those are which are interrelated. So for me, it's 1. And then everything else are trade-offs that I need to minimize. That makes my life, at least my optimization process, more clear. But on the second hand, I need to make this process such that this is inclusive. And that's where the process and the innovation of the institutions and the governance are central. Because if it is not inclusive, I can develop a new technology that will create more concentration, and it will create a problem in the sense that 1 or 2 companies will control everything. And you also don't want that, because that will create market power issues. So again, the institutions and innovation in the process is really important together with innovation on technology.
The IPCC approach to this, it really shifted the agenda for climate, for green agenda. Yeah, is this what we should expect from the Food Systems Summit?
The Food Systems Summit is supposed to start a transformation process. No, it's supposed to create awareness of the importance of the transformation process, and it has a combination of things. One is a bottom-up approach, trying to bring the voices from the countries and trying to build up into evidence. So it has a second component, which is evidence building. There's half a scientific committee, which is trying to bring all the evidence possible, and FAO is playing a role to try to model and to bring measurements of trade-offs and so on, which vary country by country, so that we can have the science plus the dialogue that will help us to come with solutions. But the important thing, if this summit is going to be successful, is if we start in action and we start to bring solutions that could make the difference. And it's not a summit that ends next year. The transformation has to continue, and that's why we are saying we need to push this agri-food system transformation over time. Clearly, what the SG said about food loss and waste is incredible that today we have that. And that requires changes and innovation, but also prioritization of interventions. But that's a win-win, no? It's more food, less use of natural resources, less emissions, and more efficiency for producers. It's something that we need to resolve, and it's one of the targets of the summit.
We'll talk more about that in just a moment as well. Maximo has to go in just a moment, so I want to give him his parting shot before he disappears. Maximo.
No, apologies. I have to launch SOFA today, so I have to run to the launch of SOFA, the State of Food and Agriculture. So no, the point that I wanted to make is let's not forget about the complements: governance, institutions, and human capital. Because if we forget them, no matter we digitalize and we create new technologies, we will be creating exclusion and not inclusion. and we will increasing the divide, digital divide or other types of divides, and especially inequalities. And then we are not solving anything. So it's really important that we take into account that in any transformation that we do. Thank you very much.